He spent 3 years on television telling America he had proof of Russian collusion. He was censured by Congress for lying. He made up a president's words in front of the whole country. And now, with all of that on his record, he was investigating the Vice President of the United States over a kayak trip. The hillbilly from Ohio was not amused. "Mr. Vice President, you directed the United States Army Corps of Engineers to alter the water level of an Ohio river, a federal waterway, so you could go kayaking on your birthday. That is an abuse of the office you hold, and this committee intends to determine the full extent of that abuse." Adam Schiff stood behind the committee table in the Senate hearing room, his reading glasses perched at the exact angle that 24 years of congressional hearings had taught him, projected both seriousness and approachability. He was 4 months into his first term as senator from California, and he was using his seat on the Oversight Subcommittee to do what he had done for most of his career: investigate. His target was the Vice President of the United States. "Before we begin," Schiff continued, his voice carrying the same measured prosecutorial rhythm that CNN and MSNBC viewers knew the way sports fans know a signature play, "I want to address the elephant in the room, or rather, the chameleon." He looked at Vance. "In 2016, you called President Trump America's Hitler. Your words, you described his political movement as cultural heroin. Ironic, Mr. Vice President. I'm giving your family's history with the substance." He let the word land. "You told Charlie Rose you were a never-Trump guy. You wrote in a private message that you considered Trump reprehensible. And then, when the political winds shifted, you became his most loyal defender. You ran on his ticket. You sit in his chair." He adjusted his glasses. "You called professional women, and I'm quoting, childless cat ladies who are miserable in their own lives and the choices they've made. You have the least political experience of any vice president in American history. 2 years and 7 days in the Senate before you were sworn in." He folded his hands, the gesture of a prosecutor who had finished his opening. "So before this committee examines your conduct, Mr. Vice President, I want the American people to understand who is sitting in that chair. A man who changes his convictions the way other men change their ties." The Democratic staffers in the gallery nodded. Schiff's communications team was already clipping the cultural heroin line for social media. This was the Schiff California had just elected. Sharp, relentless, the man who had stood on the Senate floor during impeachment and said right matters until his voice cracked. He was good at this. He had been good at this for a quarter-century. J.D. Vance sat in the chairman's seat on the raised dais above the witness table. He had invoked his constitutional authority as president of the Senate to preside over the hearing himself, a procedural move Schiff's team had not seen coming and could not block. The vice president was 41 years old, the youngest person to hold the office since Richard Nixon, and he sat with the stillness of a man who had learned as a child that showing emotion in a chaotic household was a luxury he could not afford. He wore a navy suit, no tie. His beard was trimmed close. His accent when he spoke was flat Ohio, the accent of factory towns and diners and VFW halls, the accent coastal politicians heard as unsophisticated and that 63 million Trump voters heard as home. In front of him was a single box. Cardboard, the kind you buy at a hardware store for $3. No laptop, no colored tabs, no legal team whispering in his ear. Just a box, and inside it, 7 years of receipts. When Schiff finished, Vance leaned into his microphone. "Senator Schiff." His voice was slow and deliberate, and the voice of a man who had survived a childhood that would have broken most adults and had come out of it with a vocabulary that could fill a Yale law classroom and a delivery that never left Middletown, Ohio. You've spent 2 minutes telling America things I've said. That's fair. I've said a lot of things. Some I regret. The America's Hitler comment, I regret that. I was wrong. And unlike you, Senator, I admit when I'm wrong publicly, without a fundraising email attached. He opened the box. But you didn't bring me here to talk about kayaks, did you? You brought me here because the man you tried to remove from office twice was re-elected by the American people. And they put me, a hillbilly from Middletown, Ohio, with a mother in rehab and a grandmother with 19 handguns, in the chair above yours. That bothers you more than any river in Ohio. He pulled out the first document. So let's talk about records. Not mine, yours. Starting with the 53 times you went on national television and lied to the American people. Vance set a printed compilation on the desk, a spreadsheet meticulously assembled listing every TV appearance where Adam Schiff had claimed to have evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. Dates, networks, exact quotes. Between 2017 and 2020, you appeared on national television 53 times and made variations of the same claim. He read from the list. CNN, March 22, 2017. I have seen direct evidence of collusion. MSNBC, April 14, 2017. The evidence of collusion is in plain sight. ABC, January 7th, to 2018. There is direct evidence of collusion in the public record and beyond what's in the public record. He looked up. Direct evidence, not suspicion, not concern, not questions worth asking. Direct evidence. You told the American people 53 times that you had personally seen proof that the President of the United States had conspired with a foreign adversary. That is the most serious accusation a public official can make, and you made it 53 times. He pulled out the Mueller report summary. On March 22, 2019, Special Counsel Robert Mueller concluded his investigation. 22 months, 34 indictments, 500 witnesses. And his conclusion, I'm reading from Volume 1, page 2. The investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. He set it down. Did not establish. The most thorough investigation in modern American history. 22 months. Unlimited resources, a team of prosecutors that included some of the most aggressive attorneys in the Department of Justice, and they could not find what you told America you had seen. Then Vance did something none of the senators expected. He set the documents aside, pushed the box to the corner of the desk, and spoke from memory. Not from notes, from a place deeper than notes. Senator, I want to tell you what was happening in my life while you were on CNN. His voice changed. Still flat. I still Ohio. But the register dropped the way a voice drops when it stops performing and starts remembering. In 2017, the year you began your 53-appearance television tour, I was living in Middletown, Ohio, my hometown. Population 48,000. It used to be a steel town. Armco Steel employed 10,000 people. Good jobs, middle-class wages, the kind of jobs where a man could raise a family, buy a house, and retire with dignity. Those jobs were gone by 2017. Had been gone for years. You know what replaced them? Opioids, fentanyl, heroin, OxyContin. In 2017, Butler County, where Middletown sits, had one of the highest overdose death rates in the United States. 15 deaths in a single month. In a community of 48,000 people. That's one funeral every 2 days. He paused. not for effect. Because what came next was not a talking point. My mother was using again that year. I don't remember which relapse it was. Her third, her fifth, her seventh. After a while, you stop counting. You just pick up the phone and listen to whoever is calling and find out which hospital or which jail or which friend's couch she's on this time. That was 2017 for me. And Washington, the city where you sit, the city where the cameras are, the city that decides what America pays attention to, Washington was consumed by one story: Russian collusion. Your story. 3 years. Every committee hearing, every Sunday show, every breaking news chyron, and every ounce of political oxygen in the United States Congress was sucked into your investigation. 3 years where opioid legislation stalled in committee. 3 years where infrastructure bills died on the calendar. 3 years where small-town America, the places you fly over between Washington and your fundraisers in Los Angeles, was forgotten. Not because the problems weren't real, because you were on television and the cameras only point in one direction. He held up the Mueller conclusion one more time. Did not establish. That's what 3 years and $32 million produced. While you were on CNN, my neighbors were dying and nobody in Washington noticed. He pulled out one more document. A staff memo from the House Intelligence Committee dated March 2018. It made public in 2020 after Republican members forced its release. This is a memo from your own staff, your own analysts, written to you as chairman. I'm going to read it. He read, "Chairman, we have reviewed all available intelligence related to allegations of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russian government actors. We have not found evidence supporting the collusion narrative. Recommend adjusting public messaging to reflect the actual state of the evidence." He set the memo down. Your staff told you there was no evidence in writing, and you went on CNN the same week and said the evidence of collusion is quite significant. You didn't adjust your messaging. You adjusted your staff's expectations of your honesty. $32 million. Do you know what that buys in Middletown, Ohio? A rehab center for 500 people, and an entire new wing at the county hospital. Repairs to every road in Butler County. But that money went to your investigation, Senator, and my community. The community that was dying while you were performing got nothing. Vance pulled out a USB drive and plugged it into the hearing room's media system. The screens lit up with C-SPAN footage, dated September 26, 2019. "This is you," Vance said. September 26, 2019. The House Intelligence Committee hearing on the whistleblower complaint regarding President Trump's phone call with Ukrainian President Zelensky. You were chairman. Millions of Americans were watching live, and you did something that had never been done before in the history of the United States Congress. He pressed play. Schiff's voice filled the room, his 2019 voice dramatic and rhythmic, looking down at a paper as if he were reading from an official document. "I have a favor I want from you, though, and I'm going to say this only 7 times, so you better listen good. I want you to make up dirt on my political opponent. Understand? Lots of it on this and on that." Vance paused the video. "Those words, make up dirt, 7 times. You better listen good. You read them from the dais of the Intelligence Committee. You appeared to be reading from the transcript of the president's call. Millions of Americans believed they were hearing the actual words of the President of the United States. He pulled up the actual transcript side by side. Here is what the President said, and here is what you told America. The President said, they are not the same. Trump never said, make up dirt. Never said 7 times. Never said, you better listen good. None of those words appear in the transcript, not one. He looked at Schiff. When Congressman Mike Turner pointed this out on camera during the hearing, you said, "My summary of the president's call was meant to be, at least part, in parody." Vance let the word hang in the air. Parody! You fabricated the words of the commander-in-chief. You read them from the dais of the most powerful intelligence committee in the world. You presented them to a nation watching live on television. And when you were caught in real time by a colleague who was reading the actual transcript, you called it parody. He straightened. Senator, I served 4 years in the United States Marine Corps. I was deployed to Iraq. In the Marines, every piece of communication, every report, every briefing, every intelligence summary carries the weight of life and death. If I had fabricated the content of a classified communication and presented it to my commanding officer as real, I would have been charged under Article 107 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, falsifying official statements. The penalty is dishonorable discharge and up to 5 years in federal prison. You fabricated the words of the president before Congress. The penalty for you was nothing, actually less than nothing. You used that fabrication as the foundation for impeachment proceedings against President Trump. You tried to remove a sitting president using evidence you made up. And you called it parody. He leaned forward. And here's what makes this personal for me, Senator. You used that fabrication and the investigation built on lies like it to impeach the man who chose me, President Trump, my boss. You tried to remove him from office. The Senate acquitted 52 to 48. You lost. And then the American people re-elected Donald Trump. Not despite your investigation, because of it. Because 63 million Americans watched you fabricate evidence, watched you grandstand on television, watched you spend 3 years and $32 million chasing a hoax. And they decided they trusted him more than they trusted you, and they elected me as his vice president. A hillbilly from Middletown, Ohio. The kid who grew up in a house where the police came so often the neighbors stopped calling. That's who the voters put in this chair. He gestured at the room. So, here we are. You, the man who fabricated presidential communications to launch an impeachment, are now investigating me for a kayak trip. The Army Corps of Engineers adjusted water outflow per standard Secret Service protocol, the same kind of adjustment made for presidential travel dozens of times each year. And you've convened a Senate hearing? He shook his head. A man who made up a president's phone call is investigating a man for kayaking. I want every American listening to sit with that for a moment. He pulled out one more document from the fabrication era. And the phone call wasn't the only thing you fabricated, Senator. And before the impeachment inquiry began, you were asked directly on CNN on September 17, 2019, whether your committee had spoken with the whistleblower whose complaint launched the investigation. He read Schiff's response. We have not spoken directly with the whistleblower. We would like to. Your words on national television. He set the transcript down. That was not true. Your staff had met with the whistleblower before the complaint was filed. Your committee was involved in shaping the very complaint you then used to launch impeachment proceedings. And when asked about it on national television, you said, we have not spoken directly with the whistleblower. Not an exaggeration, not a parody, a lie on camera about the origin of a presidential impeachment. Schiff leaned into his microphone. His voice was hard now, the prosecutor's voice, the one that had cross-examined witnesses for 24 years. Mr. Vice President, the whistleblower's complaint was independently verified by the Inspector General of the Intelligence Community, who found it credible, and urgent. The credibility of the complaint is not the issue, Vance said. The issue is that you lied about your contact with the whistleblower. You were asked a direct question. You gave a false answer. Whether the complaint was credible is irrelevant to whether you were honest about your involvement. You weren't. And you know you weren't, because 2 weeks later, when the New York Times reported that your staff had met with the whistleblower, you didn't deny it. You just stopped talking about it. That's your pattern. Senator, you make a false claim. It gets repeated on every network. And when the truth catches up, you move on to the next claim, because by then, the damage is done. Vance pulled out a thick document, the official text of House Resolution 521, passed June 21, 2023. On June 21, 2023, the United States House of Representatives voted 213 to 209 to censure you. I want to read the findings because I want every American to hear the exact words their elected representatives used to describe your conduct. He read slowly, each phrase a complete sentence for the listening audience. Representative Schiff abused this trust by alleging he had evidence of collusion that, as is clear from reports by Special Counsel Robert Mueller, Department of Justice Inspector General Michael Horowitz, and Special Counsel Durham, it never existed. He looked up. Never existed. 3 separate investigations. Mueller, Horowitz, Durham, Republican, bipartisan, and independent. 3 different investigators, 3 different methods. One conclusion: the evidence you claim to have never existed. He continued reading. Representative Schiff spread false accusations that the Trump campaign colluded with Russia. False accusations. That's the official finding of the United States Congress. More, Representative Schiff released a memo justifying the accuracy of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act warrant application on Trump associate Carter Page, which was later found by Inspector General Horowitz to have 17 major mistakes and omissions. He set the resolution down. 17, not minor clerical errors, major mistakes and omissions in a FISA warrant application. The most powerful domestic surveillance tool the federal government has. A tool designed to spy on foreign terrorists used against an American citizen based on opposition research, funded by the opposing political campaign. And Inspector General Horowitz didn't just find errors. He found that the FBI misled the FISA court. Those are the words of the presiding judge. Misled. And an FBI lawyer, Kevin Kleinsmith, pleaded guilty to altering a document used in that very application. He literally changed the words in an email to make the surveillance target look more suspicious. He looked at Schiff. You released a memo to the American public telling them the FISA application was legitimate and accurate. The Inspector General found 17 errors. A federal judge said the FBI misled the court. A federal employee went to prison for falsifying evidence in the application. And to this day, you have never corrected your memo, never apologized, never acknowledged the 17 errors. He pulled out the fundraising data. But you did something else after the censure. Your campaign sent an email to supporters that night. I have it here today. The Republican House censured me for telling the truth about Donald Trump. They want to silence me because they fear the truth. Stand with me. Donate now. He set it down. You raised $8.1 million in 30 days from the censure. The House of Representatives officially declared that you lied to the American people, and you turned it into an $8 million fundraising campaign. He translated the number. In Middletown, Ohio, where I grew up, if you get caught lying at work, you lose your job. If you get caught lying to your neighbors, you lose your friends. If you get caught lying to your family, you lose your family. You got caught lying to America, and you gained $8 million. That's the difference between Middletown and Washington, Senator. In my town, lying has consequences. In yours, it has a donation link. Vance set the censure resolution aside and opened the final section of the box. 2 documents, one from January 20th, 2025, one from August 2025. January 20th, 2025, the last day of Joe Biden's presidency, his final hours. And in those final hours, President Biden issued a series of preemptive pardons. Members of the January 6th committee, impeachment managers, congressional investigators, you were among them. He held up the pardon announcement. A preemptive pardon. Let me explain what that means for the Americans listening at home. A preemptive pardon is issued to someone who has not been charged with a crime, but whom the president believes might be charged. It's insurance. It says, I think you could be prosecuted, so I'm protecting you before I leave. He looked at Schiff. Why would an innocent man need a pardon? I'm asking sincerely. If you did nothing wrong, if the investigations were legitimate, if the evidence was real, if the impeachment was proper, if the FISA memo was accurate, why would the president of your own party on his last day in office feel the need to pardon you? He didn't wait for an answer. The answer is because he wasn't sure. Because even the president who benefited from your investigations, who you helped politically, who your work supported, even he wasn't confident that your conduct would survive legal scrutiny. So he pardoned you, just in case. He pulled out the second document. And now, right now, as we sit in this hearing, the Department of Justice has appointed a special attorney to investigate you. Not for Russia, not for impeachment, for mortgage fraud, allegations of financial misconduct in your personal dealings. You have called this investigation political. I want to note something about that word. For 7 years, every person you investigated, every witness you subpoenaed, every official you questioned, every target of your committees called your investigations political. And every time they said it, you told the cameras, nobody is above the law. The facts must be followed wherever they lead. Your words, 53 CNN appearances worth of words. Now the investigation is pointed at you, and suddenly it's political. Suddenly, the facts should not be followed wherever they lead. Suddenly, the process is unfair. The word changes meaning depending on which side of the table you sit on, doesn't it, Senator? He turned to the gallery. I'd like to introduce testimony from Karen Walsh. Ms. Walsh, second row. A woman in her 50s stood, navy blazer, no jewelry, in the posture of someone who had spent 2 decades in rooms where precision was not a preference, but a job requirement. My name is Karen Walsh. I served for 20 years as a counterintelligence analyst in the Federal Bureau of Investigation. From 2015 to 2020, I was assigned to matters related to the Crossfire Hurricane investigation. The room stilled. In early 2018, I participated in an internal assessment of the evidentiary basis for the investigation. The assessment was straightforward. The evidence did not support a criminal conspiracy between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. There were contacts, meetings, communications, and interactions that warranted examination, but contacts are not conspiracy, and by early 2018, we knew the difference. She paused. This assessment was communicated up the chain of command. It was also communicated through appropriate channels to congressional leadership, including the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. She looked at Schiff. I'm not here to say anyone ordered us to fabricate evidence. That didn't happen. What I am here to say is that the message from Capitol Hill, from the chairman's office specifically, was unmistakable. The investigation must not end. Those were not the exact words, but every analyst in our division understood the meaning. We were being told to continue, not because the evidence justified continuation, but because the investigation itself served a political purpose. She straightened. I raised concerns internally in March 2018. I was told by a supervising agent, Karen, the Hill wants this alive. Don't rock the boat. I chose to stay and do my job with integrity, but I documented my concerns in a personal memorandum at the time. That memorandum has been provided to this committee. Schiff grabbed his microphone. Ms. Walsh, are you aware that the investigation you describe resulted in 34 indictments and multiple guilty indictments for process crimes and crimes unrelated to collusion, Walsh said, her voice never wavering. 20 years of FBI training had taught her how to handle cross-examination. Tax fraud, lying to the FBI, failure to register as a foreign agent. Not one indictment for conspiracy between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. Not one. That was the question the investigation was supposed to answer, and the answer was no. Schiff pressed. The Mueller report documented over 140 contacts between the campaign and Russian. Contacts are not conspiracy, Senator. I've already said that contacts warrant examination. We examined them. The examination was thorough, and the conclusion was contacts, not conspiracy. That distinction exists for a reason. If every contact between a political campaign and a foreign national constituted conspiracy, half of Washington would be under indictment, including, respectfully, members of this committee. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Schiff's counsel whispered urgently. Schiff sat back. Vance let the testimony settle into the room like smoke. Then he spoke. The Hill wants this alive. That's what an FBI analyst was told when she reported that the evidence didn't support the investigation. The Hill wants this alive. It don't rock the boat. The investigation that cost $32 million. The investigation that paralyzed Congress for 3 years. The investigation that consumed every headline, while communities like mine buried their dead from opioids. That investigation was kept alive not by evidence, but by political pressure from Capitol Hill. He looked at Schiff. Ms. Walsh just told you under oath that the evidence didn't support conspiracy, that her assessment was communicated to your office, and that the message back was, keep it alive, not find more evidence, not pursue this lead, just keep it alive. Because the investigation itself, not its conclusions, not its findings, the investigation itself was the point. It was your platform, your content, your 8 p.m. cable news segment, and you kept it alive while communities like mine were dying for attention that never came. He looked at Schiff. From your office, Senator, from your staff, from the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, who told America 53 times that he had direct evidence, while his own analysts were telling him the evidence didn't exist, and the FBI was being told to keep it alive. Vance stood up from the chairman's chair, the full height of a man who had learned to stand straight in Marine Corps boot camp at Camp Lejeune, and had never unlearned the habit. He was 5 feet 11 inches, not tall by Washington standards, where power usually came in bigger packages, but standing on the raised dais, looking down at the witness table where Schiff sat with his legal counsel, He occupied the room the way his grandmother had occupied their house in Middletown. Completely, unapologetically, and with the quiet authority of someone who had survived worse. "Let me put this together," he said. "Not as a lawyer, not as a vice president. As a hillbilly from Middletown, Ohio, who got where he is by telling the truth, and who is now looking at a man who got where he is by doing the opposite." He spoke from memory. Each Schiff scandal connected to a Middletown reality the way a bridge connects two banks of a river, because without the bridge, neither side understands the other. 2017. You go on CNN and tell America, "I have seen direct evidence of collusion." That year in Middletown, Ohio, my friend Tommy Harkins dies of a fentanyl overdose. Tommy and I had been friends since 7th grade. He played football. He worked at his uncle's garage. He was not on CNN. He was not in Washington. He was in a bathroom in Middletown. And by the time the paramedics arrived, he was gone. Nobody in Washington mentioned Tommy's name. Nobody in Washington noticed that Butler County had 15 overdose deaths that month because Washington was watching you. Because the cameras were pointed at your hearing room. Because your hoax was the only story that mattered. 2018. You hide transcripts, 73 closed-door interviews, where Obama's own officials said under oath that they saw no evidence of collusion. James Clapper, Susan Rice, Loretta Lynch, and Samantha Power, all of them said no evidence. You kept those transcripts classified, and you kept going on television. That year in Middletown, the last residential rehab center in Butler County closed. Funding cuts, federal resources redirected. My mother, Beverly, had nowhere to go for treatment. The rehab center that might have saved her next relapse was gone. And the $32 million that could have funded 100 centers, like it was being spent on your investigation. An investigation your own staff told you had no evidence to support. 2019. You fabricate the president's words before Congress. Make up dirt. 7 times. You better listen good. None of it real. You call it parody. You use it to impeach. The Senate acquits 52 to 48. That year in Middletown, 3 families on the street where I grew up lost their homes. Not to foreclosure, to medical debt from addiction treatment. Because in communities like mine, getting sober costs money that people don't have. And the bankruptcy that follows costs everything else. 3 families, 1 street. Nobody in Washington noticed. 2023. You are censured by the House of Representatives. Misleading the American people. Official finding. You raise $8.1 million from it. That year in Middletown, the opioid death rate was still double the national average. The rehab center was still closed. The families on my street had not gotten their homes back, but you had $8 million. 2025. President Biden pardons you preemptively on his last day. The Department of Justice opens an investigation into you for mortgage fraud. And you, with all of that on your record, use your first months as a United States Senator to investigate the Vice President of the United States for a kayak trip. He paused. Let the silence build. A kayak trip. Then he delivered the lines he had been carrying since Middletown. You built your career on a hoax, Sir Senator. 3 years of direct evidence that 3 separate investigations found did not exist. A phone call you fabricated and read before the nation. A FISA memo you told America was accurate, while an inspector general found 17 errors and an FBI lawyer went to prison. A censure you monetized. A pardon you accepted from a president who wasn't sure you were clean. I built my life on the truth. Poverty, true. A mother's addiction, true. A grandmother with 19 handguns who raised me when nobody else would, true. The United States Marine Corps, true. Iraq, true. Ohio State on the GI Bill, true. Yale Law on loans I paid back over 11 years, true. Hillbilly Elegy, 10 million copies, every word true. The difference between us is verifiability, Senator. Everything I have ever said about my life can be checked. The poverty records exist. The military service records exist. The Yale transcripts exist. The book exists. And the people in it exist. And they will tell you that's exactly how it happened. Every claim, every story, every detail, verifiable. Everything you claimed about evidence, not verifiable, because it didn't exist. 3 investigations confirmed it. Your own staff confirmed it. The FBI confirmed it. And you went on television anyway 53 times and lied. He looked at Schiff directly. You tried to remove a president with fabricated evidence. You failed. The voters re-elected him and put a hillbilly from Middletown in the chair above you. This chair. The one I'm standing behind right now. And now, with your censure on the record, put your pardon in your pocket, and the DOJ on your doorstep, you're using the United States Senate to investigate a kayak trip. He almost smiled. Almost. Senator, I've been called a lot of things. Hillbilly, deplorable, America's Hitler's sidekick, childless cat ladies guy. I've been called every name Washington can invent. But the one thing nobody has ever called me, and nobody can call me, is a liar. Because unlike your direct evidence, my story actually happened. He settled into the quiet that came next. The quiet before the kill. In Middletown, my grandmother Mama had a saying. She said it in her redneck accent with her bad grammar in a house with 19 guns and a front door that didn't always lock. She said, "Don't start none, won't be none." You started this, Senator. Not today. 7 years ago. When you went on television and lied, when you fabricated evidence, when you wasted 3 years and $32 million on a hoax, while communities like mine were dying, while Tommy Harkins was dying, while my mother was relapsing, while families were losing their homes. I didn't start this, but I'm finishing it. Schiff stood. It was reflex, the instinct of a man who had spent 24 years in hearing rooms and knew that the way to survive a devastating closing argument was to get on your feet and deliver one of your own. He was good at this. He had survived impeachment proceedings, censure votes, cable news wars, and a recall effort. He had always found the words. He grabbed the microphone, leaned in, and began his strongest weapon. The prosecutorial monologue he had used 1,000 times. Sir, I have dedicated my career to the protection of democracy and the rule of screech. Microphone feedback, sharp and piercing, the shriek of a speaker pushed past its limit, cut through the chamber like a blade. Schiff had leaned too close in his urgency. The sound system screamed. He flinched back. The gallery flinched. A senator in the front row covered her ears. The sound died. Silence. 3 seconds of dead air in a room of 200 people who had forgotten how to breathe. And into that silence, J.D. Vance spoke. Calm, almost gentle, the voice of a man from Ohio who had seen far worse than a microphone glitch and was not about to raise his voice over one. Careful, Senator. The last time you spoke into a microphone in this building, you made up a president's phone call. The gallery erupted. Not just Republican staffers, and even the Capitol police officer by the door looked at the ceiling to keep from reacting. It was the kind of laughter that is not really laughter, the sound a room makes when something true has been said so cleanly that the only response is the involuntary noise of recognition. Schiff stood frozen, one hand on the microphone stand, one hand on the table, half standing, half sitting, the posture of a man who had been interrupted mid-sentence and could not find his way back to the start. For 24 years, through 2 impeachments, through investigations that filled cable news for thousands of hours, through a censure vote he had turned into a fundraiser, Adam Schiff had always had words. Words were his weapon, his shield, his whole political identity. He had no words now, not because he couldn't think of them, but because there was nothing to say. The man above him had just compressed his whole career into one sentence. The last time you spoke into a microphone in this building, you made up a president's phone call. And it was accurate. Factually, historically, documentably accurate. And there is no prosecutorial training, no cable news experience, no amount of political skill that teaches you how to answer a truth everyone in the room already knows. He sat down slowly. The microphone hummed once and settled. His legal counsel put a hand on his shoulder. He didn't acknowledge it. He sat with his hands flat on the table, staring at nothing, while the room slowly worked its way back toward something like order. The committee chairman, a Republican who had been waiting for this day, spoke into his own microphone, which worked perfectly. Based on the testimony presented today, including the testimony of former FBI analyst Karen Walsh, this committee formally refers the following matters to the Department of Justice and the Senate Ethics Committee for review: the suppression of exculpatory intelligence transcripts, the fabrication of presidential communications before Congress, and the mischaracterization of FISA warrant accuracy in public memoranda. He paused. Additionally, pending Ethics Committee review, Senator Schiff's access to classified briefings and sensitive compartmented information facilities is suspended effective immediately. Schiff's SCIF access, his ability to enter classified rooms, read classified documents, participate in intelligence briefings, was gone. For a member of a Senate committee, and it was the equivalent of a surgeon losing operating room privileges. You could still come to work, you just couldn't do the job. 2 Democratic senators on the committee stood, gathered their papers, and left. They didn't make statements. They didn't look at Schiff. They just left. And their departure said everything their silence was meant to contain. We are not going to defend this. Not today. Not with an FBI analyst's testimony on the record. Not with a censure already documented. Not with a pardon already accepted. Schiff sat alone at the committee table. His legal counsel was packing a briefcase. His communications director had left the room. The gallery was filing out, and the image that the C-SPAN cameras would broadcast to 40 million households that evening was the last one. A senator sitting alone in an empty hearing room, the microphone in front of him still and silent, while the man who had called him to account was already gone. The hearing ended at 4:23 p.m. Eastern. By 4:30, the Internet had chosen its favorites. The clip that blew up first was the microphone line. "Careful, Senator. The last time you spoke into a microphone in this building, you made up a president's phone call. 12 words viewed 42 million times in 24 hours. The caption that spread fastest was the simplest. The hillbilly wins. The second clip was the Middletown timeline. Vance tying each Schiff scandal to a death, a closure, a family torn apart. Tommy Harkins, my friend since 7th grade, dies of a fentanyl overdose. Nobody in Washington mentions his name. It moved through veteran communities, recovery communities, and in small-town America, not as a political clip, but as recognition. People in towns like Middletown across the country shared it with the same caption. This is us. This is what they ignored. The third clip was Karen Walsh. The Hill wants this alive. Don't rock the boat. It spread through law enforcement and intelligence communities, current and former agents who recognized the pressure she described and who understood what it meant that a congressional chairman had kept an investigation alive, not because the evidence justified it, but because the investigation served his political purposes. Former FBI officials began contacting the committee within 48 hours to back up Walsh's account. "She's not alone," one told the Washington Post. "There were at least a dozen of us who knew the case was weak by early 2018. And we all knew." The fourth clip was the kayak contrast, a split screen someone at the Daily Wire assembled within hours. On the left, Schiff reading fabricated presidential words before Congress. On the right, a kayak on an Ohio river. The caption, "He did this, and he's investigating this." It was shared 23 million times. The absurdity was the point. Fox News ran the hearing under a chyron that would define the week: the hillbilly and the hoax. CNN led with, "VP Vance delivers scathing rebuke of Senator Schiff in contentious hearing." MSNBC's coverage was notably brief. 4 minutes of straight news, no panel discussion. The most devastating commentary came from CNN's Van Jones. "He did something nobody else has ever done to Schiff," Jones said on his evening panel. "He connected the lies to real human cost, and not political cost, human cost. A dead friend, a closed rehab center, a mother without treatment, families losing homes to medical debt. He made the audience feel what 3 years of a hoax cost the people who weren't on television." Jones paused. "And the microphone line, my God. That's going to follow Schiff for the rest of his career. The last time you spoke into a microphone in this building, you made up a president's phone call. You can't come back from that because it's true." A Democratic strategist who had worked on Schiff's Senate campaign told The Atlantic anonymously, "Vance is more dangerous than Trump. Trump attacks with insults. Vance attacks with his autobiography. You can't fact-check a memoir, and when he connects your scandal to his dead friend, there's no rebuttal. There's only silence." Within the Democratic caucus, the response was total silence. No senator defended Schiff on camera. The Congressional Progressive Caucus issued a statement about the importance of institutional integrity that mentioned no one by name. Schiff's California fundraising operation, which had been humming at $20 million per quarter, reported a sharp drop in online donations in the 72 hours after the hearing. The censure fundraising playbook doesn't work twice, a Democratic strategist told Politico. The first time he was a martyr, the second time he's a pattern. The Biden pardon came under renewed scrutiny. Why pardon a man who did nothing wrong? Became the question no ally could answer without making things worse. The DOJ mortgage fraud investigation, which had been moving quietly, suddenly drew public attention. Schiff's attorneys issued a statement calling the investigation politically motivated. The statement changed no one's mind. Hashtag the hillbilly and the hoax trended for 48 straight hours. But the hashtag that lasted longer, the one that kept resurfacing for weeks afterward, was simpler. Hashtag Tommy Harkins. The name of a boy from Middletown who died in a bathroom in 2017 while Washington was watching Adam Schiff on CNN. A boy who had never been mentioned in a congressional hearing until the day his childhood friend from the vice president's chair said his name out loud and asked America to remember what it had been ignoring. J.D. Vance did not hold a press conference. He did not post on social media. He drove to Middletown. It was dark when he arrived. As the Secret Service motorcade pulled into Woodside Cemetery on Linden Avenue, a small cemetery on the east side of town, the kind of place where the headstones are modest and the grass is cut by volunteers from the VFW. Vance told the agents he needed 10 minutes. They gave him the perimeter. He walked alone. Tommy Harkins's grave was in the third row from the east fence. A flat stone, nothing elaborate. His name, his dates, 1984 to 2017, and a line his mother had chosen. Beloved son and friend. Vance stood there for a while. He didn't talk. He didn't need to. He had said Tommy's name in the United States Senate that afternoon, in front of 40 million people. And that was enough talking for one day. He just stood and looked at the stone and thought about 7th grade, about football practice, and about the garage where Tommy had taught him how to change oil, about the last time he'd seen him. Thin, jittery, with the hollow eyes opioids give people before they take everything else. He thought about what he'd said in the hearing about the cameras pointed in one direction, about Washington and its all-consuming obsession with a hoax, while towns like this one lowered their flags for boys like Tommy. He didn't feel triumphant. Triumph was for people who had won something. What he felt was the specific exhaustion of a man who had carried a truth for 7 years and had finally set it down in a room where it mattered. He got back in the car and told the driver to head to Cincinnati. He'd be home by midnight. Usha and the kids were waiting. In Middletown, Ohio, Ruth Harkins sat in the break room of the Walmart on Town Boulevard watching the hearing clip on her phone. She worked the night shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., stocking shelves the way she had for 4 years since the factory closed. The break room was empty except for the hum of the vending machine and the blue light of her screen. She watched J.D. Vance say her son's name. Tommy Harkins, my friend since 7th grade, dies of a fentanyl overdose. She paused the video, looked at the ceiling, and closed her eyes. She had found Tommy in the bathroom on March 14, 2017. She had called 911. She had done CPR the way the dispatcher told her to. 30 compressions, 2 breaths, 30 compressions, 2 breaths for 7 minutes until the paramedics arrived. They told her he was gone. She already knew. She had known from the moment she opened the door. 7 years. 7 years of carrying that bathroom and its silence and its particular stillness into every room she entered. 7 years of watching Washington on television and never once hearing anyone mention the thing that had destroyed her life and the lives of thousands of families like hers. 7 years of invisibility. And tonight, in the break room of a Walmart in Middletown, Ohio, she heard the Vice President of the United States say her son's name. Not as a statistic, not as a policy point, but as a person, as Tommy, as a boy who played football and worked at his uncle's garage and had been her son. She didn't cry. She had cried every tear 7 years ago. But she put her phone down and closed her eyes and said very quietly to the empty break room, "Thank you, J.D." At the VFW post on Central Avenue in Middletown, a dozen men and women sat at the bar, watching the hearing replay on a television that had been tuned to Fox News since 2016 and had never been changed. They were factory workers and veterans and nurses and retirees, the people politicians flew over, and pollsters labeled non-college white working class, and that Vance in Hillbilly Elegy had simply called his people. They watched the microphone line. They laughed the hard, short laugh of people who had been vindicated. They watched the Tommy Harkins section. They went quiet. 3 of them had known Tommy. One, a woman named Deborah, who worked at the Dollar General on Verity Parkway, had been Tommy's neighbor growing up. She had babysat him when he was 6. He said Tommy's name, Deborah said. She was 61. She had buried her own brother to opioids in 2019. He said it in Washington. Oh, in the Senate, where those people make the laws that don't help us and give the money to investigations that don't matter. He said Tommy's name. She finished her beer and set the glass down. That's all I needed to hear. Someone up there remembered we exist. The bartender, a retired Marine like Vance, topped off her glass without being asked. That was how things worked in Middletown. You took care of each other because for a long time nobody else had. In Washington, D.C., in a Senate office that still smelled like new carpet, Adam Schiff sat behind his desk at 11 p.m. The desk lamp was on. The office was empty. His phone was face down, buzzing with calls he was not answering. On the wall hung the photographs that defined his career. Schiff at the impeachment podium, Schiff before the Intelligence Committee, Schiff on CNN, on MSNBC, on ABC. Right matters, he had once said. The phrase that made him famous. The phrase printed on T-shirts and tote bags and campaign signs across California. Right matters. He had believed it when he said it. He was almost certain he had believed it. But tonight, alone in his office with SCIF access suspended, a DOJ investigation open, and a pardon sitting in a drawer like a loaded weapon he couldn't decide whether to display or hide. He thought about the hillbilly, about the man from Middletown who had stood in the chair above him and said, "Everything I've ever said about my life can be checked. Everything you claimed about evidence was not verifiable because it didn't exist." And the worst part, the part Adam Schiff alone at his desk at 11 p.m. could not escape, was that the hillbilly was right. Not about politics, not about policy, but about the fundamental thing. The thing Schiff had built his career on claiming to care about. The truth. At Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, a 23-year-old corporal named James Whitfield sat on the edge of his bunk watching the hearing clip on his phone. His mother was in rehab in Kentucky, her second time. His father was unknown. He had enlisted in the Marines at 18 after reading Hillbilly Elegy at the suggestion of his high school guidance counselor. "Read this," she'd said. "It's about a kid like you." He had read it in 2 days, and he had recognized everything. The chaos, the addiction, the feeling of being invisible to a country that talked about poverty in abstractions and never in names. He had walked into the recruiter's office the following Monday, and now he watched the man who wrote that book stand in the vice president's chair and say, "While you were on CNN, my neighbors were dying, and nobody in Washington noticed." James Whitfield nodded. He touched the Marine Corps emblem on his uniform, the eagle, globe, and anchor that J.D. Vance had worn before him. He thought about his mother, about the rehab center that might save her or might not, about the town he came from and the country he had sworn to protect. And he thought, Washington forgot us, but one of us is there now, and he didn't forget. The senator built his career on a hoax. 3 years of direct evidence that didn't exist. A fabricated phone call read before the nation. A censure he turned into a fundraiser. And a pardon he accepted from a president who wasn't sure he was clean. The hillbilly built his life on the truth. A mother's addiction, a grandmother's 19 guns, a Marine's oath, and a book that 10 million people read because they recognized their own pain in its pages. The hoax cost America $32 million and 3 years of a nation's attention, while communities like Middletown buried their dead, and nobody in Washington looked up from the camera. The truth cost nothing. Just a kid from Ohio who refused to quit. And when the two of them finally sat across from each other in the United States Senate, the fabricator and the survivor, the performance and the proof, America saw what it had always suspected, that the man who lied about evidence couldn't survive 5 minutes against a man who was the evidence.